Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Newberry's NewbTube live discussion series. I'm Will Hansen. I'm curator of Americana here at the Newberry, and I'm joined today by Fernando Martí, an artist, printmaker, and housing activist whose work engages with contemporary struggles and ancestral traditions. Fernando is originally from Ecuador. He is now based in San Francisco and has been deeply involved with the city's art and activism since the 1990s. So welcome, Fernando. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here.
So one of Fernando Martí's prints, titled Territorio, is currently on display in our exhibition Viva la Libertad, Latin America and the Age of Revolutions. This exhibition at the Newberry is open Tuesday through Saturday until July 24th. You can check the website, the Newberry website, for hours, and I hope you'll have a chance to come see it. Fernando's print is one of 40 prints from a portfolio entitled Territorio y Libertad, Gráfica sin Fronteras, or Territory and Liberty, Graphics Without Borders. You can see 8 of the prints that are on exhibit right now on your screen. And Fernando's is the one in the upper left. You'll see a closer version of it in just a second. So Fernando, can you tell us a little bit about your print and how you got involved in this project and why it was appealing to you?
Sure. So the print and this set of prints that you see before you were part of a portfolio of prints that was answered a call for art from a group in Mexico City on the topic of territory and freedom, Territorio y Libertad. I am a printmaker with a cooperative of artists across the US, with some in Canada and some in Mexico City, called Just Seeds Artist Cooperative. And we've had a long relationship with folks in Mexico. So a lot of the prints that are part of this came from Just Seeds artists. You know, on my day job, I work on housing issues in San Francisco. And so this theme of territory and land, who has access to land, how do you claim territory, how do you claim self-determination, is really close to my heart.
That's great. Yeah. So I should have mentioned, or can mention now, that the prints were published by Just Seeds, the artist cooperative based in the US, but co-published by the La Escuela de Cultura Popular Mártires de 68 in Mexico City. So it really was a sort of international collaboration. So the words on your print, which we see in close-up now, include some concepts that were central to the struggles for independence in Latin America 200 years ago, right? And some of those are familiar and easy, relatively easy at least, to translate and comprehend in English. So you have words like territorio, or territory, libertad, or liberty or freedom, as you've already translated those just in the course of discussion, tierra, or land, and cultura, or culture. But others might be less familiar to those who aren't fluent in Spanish, like ejido, or propiedad social, or autodefensa. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the words on your print and why you chose them, and what they mean to you, what their significance is in the context of this project.
Sure. You know, as a printmaker, one of the things that's really neat to me about making posters is the juxtaposition between text and image. And different from the work that I do, say, in when I'm doing etchings or linoleum cuts that are much more just the image. And so, you know, when we're given a theme, my process is often to think about the words that are associated with that. So from territory to, you know, territory coming from tierra in the Latin, and thinking about, again, those different aspects of what land means. In particular, I think, again, thinking about the work that I do today in an urban place, but knowing that any kind of work around land today is really on stolen indigenous land. And this idea of how land went from being something that was not owned to everywhere being subdivided with fences and property lines and becoming private property, it's something that kind of stays a lot in my mind. The ejidos are a system that is in many ways under attack, but was a system established in Mexico around common land ownership for indigenous people. And the Mexican Constitution, in fact, recognizes this idea of what's called in the Constitution social property, as opposed to private property. And I think there's a common thread in a lot of the work that organizations in cities are doing around finding new ways of relating to land that isn't just around private property. One of those are community land trusts, for example, in which you might have a private home or you might have a cooperative, but it sits on land that is owned by the community, and that you can't just kind of do anything on that land. There is a collective process to think about the future of that land. You had asked me earlier when we were talking about these words around autodefensa, and the last time I was in Mexico was 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, where we did some workshops together with folks from the Escuela Popular de Mártires del 68, and some other folks in Mexico. And one of the artists is a filmmaker and showed their film about the autodefensas, I think in Michoacán, which were basically, self-defense groups coming up in villages to protect folks from either the sort of the mafia, the narcotraficantes, and also from the government itself, and sort of, again, claiming self-determination in a very proactive way.
Yeah, there's such a rich history behind just the terms on the print here, and you did a wonderful job right now of sort of tying in, the objects that are hundreds of years ago that we have on exhibit right now, and the objects that are a couple of years ago. Your print is from 2018 that we also have on exhibit, but the resonances remain, right? I mean, the Mexican Constitution of 1824, the first Republican Constitution of Mexico, is in the exhibition, and those sorts of concepts, which are frankly so different than some of the concepts that are embraced in the American Constitution or Declaration of Independence, our founding documents. So there's some eye-opening moments in the exhibit too, because while the American documents and revolution were so influential on the folks fighting for freedom in Latin America, from Mexico all the way down to Chile, there were a lot of differences too, and those differences, remain today and continue to grow, even as relationships between the countries got closer or farther apart, as the case might be. So a lot of interesting food for thought there, and it's wonderful to hear that you're bringing some of these concepts or working some of these concepts into work in San Francisco and in the U.S. So just to recap for those who are joining us now, we're talking to Fernando Martí, an artist and printmaker based in San Francisco, whose work you are seeing on the screen right now is on exhibition at the Newberry through July 24th in our exhibit, Viva la Libertad, Latin America and the Age of Revolutions. If folks have questions, if you're following on YouTube or Facebook, you can type those questions into the comments section, and we'll be happy to try to address them as we talk with Fernando here. So we've talked about the words on the print, but the imagery is also so striking of the birds flying above the barbed wire. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why you chose this imagery and its connection of the images to the text for you.
Yeah. So this is, in a way, kind of a personal image in that where I live, there are a number of red-tailed hawks. There's also some Cooper's hawks and other kinds of hawks. I'm not a hawk expert, but there's something magical about seeing the hawks. There's also always, especially since the pandemic, it seems there's been an increasing number of crows and ravens around the city. And one of the striking things to see is a group of crows, ravens, kind of defending their territory that might overlap with one of these hawks and attacking the hawk, dive bombing it. Sometimes I see even little birds who are in a fight with these hawks. And so, as I thought about how people defend their land or defend their territory or even define their territory, this was just one kind of personal image that came up. And here's a very active way of defining a territory. There's many different ways of trying to kind of picture territory. I think I remember someone in school telling me, I should have looked this up before, but territory, I think was, the root of it is very much a feudal or even probably Roman. It was Orio is tower and terri is land, and so the feudal land was what you could see from your tower. And I didn't want that image.
Yeah, right.
I wanted something that was more of a collective definition of what land is for a people. And then, those territories of the birds and the hawks transcend the borders that we humans have created. And so the barbed wire or, the border fence, national borders are transcended by the way people actually see their land.
That's great. Great explanation. Thank you. We've had a couple of questions come in that I want to get to here. One question that came in on YouTube is about returning to the sort of words here. Could you talk about the ordering of the words? Are you suggesting a sort of causal relationship between these ideas, going from the top at territorio down to the bottom liberty, or some other kind of relationship? Should we read them in order, or are they all sort of equal? What's the relationship there?
Sure. I did think, I didn't put some extreme order to them, but yes, they, at the top, it is kind of more passive definition of territory or land, moving to kind of more active ways in which culture and collectivity, asambleas as assemblies, how do you make decisions about land? How do you define that as autonomous? And the word autonomía has a particular relevance in struggles in Mexico from the Zapatistas and others. So a previous portfolio that had been done also with cooperation with the Escuela de Cultura Popular was about autonomy in the villages in Chiapas. Down and that then sort of creating a sense of liberty. So yeah, there's definitely an order to how I kind of thought about it. I think, if I'm remembering right, I probably just wrote a bunch of words in my sketchbook, kind of riffing on territory and then thinking about which one made more sense. I don't think I knew the concept of propiedad social to begin with, and as I was kind of researching ejidos, which I was familiar with, I learned of this as a concept in Mexican law that I wanted to include in this.
That's great. Yeah, I will chime in and say that this print is a wonderful teaching tool, and we haven't had a huge number of school groups being able to come sort of as a group to the exhibit, but in both virtual presentations and in a couple of walks through the exhibit, I've been able to talk to students about this, and it is wonderful to talk to them about, well, why are the words in this order, right? What's the relationship between them, and how do you get from territory to liberty, right? It really works really well from my perspective, for students and those who are just lifelong learners. So thank you for that. I think even though you're being modest, I think there was a lot of thought put into it, and it works wonderfully. So for those who are joining a little bit late, we're talking to Fernando Martí, an artist and printmaker from lives in San Francisco, originally from Ecuador, about this print that you're seeing on the screen now, which is on display in our exhibition gallery at the Newberry through July 24th. The other question that's come in online from Facebook was about your artistic process, which leads perfectly into the last question I had to ask you, which was about the process of making this print. The colors are really striking on it and always catch people's attention first because they're so beautiful. So can you tell us a little bit about the process of how you make a color screen print like this, and more broadly about your artistic process more generally?
Sure. So I am a drawer. Some artists are painters. There's the drawing that became this print, and I work with pretty simple tools. My handy Uniball pen and a Sharpie, and I'll do a bunch of sketches to lay out the order in which I want images to be in. I really like kind of what you said about schools coming into to the gallery, because I do think that one of the things that's really neat about posters is that they are pedagogical tools, or they can be, and sort of have a level of complexity, and at the same time you want something that is striking in itself. You can see it once and like, hey, that's pretty cool, and then you can see it again and really kind of see more layers to it. So that's something I try to do. That's sort of the intention. I mostly work, or I do other kinds of prints, but I do a lot of screen printing. And I've been very fortunate to have been able to work with the Mission Cultural Center here in San Francisco and learn from some really great artists, Juan Fuentes and Calixto Robles, and Javier Viramontes, who really kind of taught me different skills around printmaking. And one of the things that's become kind of my go-to is doing what's called a split fountain, where you, for folks who don't know, screen printing, it's what most of our t-shirts are made of, are through screen prints. And you layer one color over another color over another color. The split fountain is when on one screen you might put two different colors and blend them together. Sometimes people call it a rainbow roll, although that's really more from linoleum cuts. But so the background was my first color, in red and in yellow, so creating that sort of range of a sky. And then on top of that, I added the black layer, and then that became the print. And then I had fun thinking about, well, my red-tailed hawk is going to have a little bit of red. So how do I, make sure that some of that red kind of bleeds into it, but is not seen as the sky, but seen as part of the hawk. There's some kind of technical aspects to that, just thinking it through. As a portfolio print, I forget how many were in the collection, if there were 50 or 100 that we made. So I kind of wanted to limit the number of screens that I had to use. But a screen print artist, I typically limit myself to 4 or 5 different colors. But some artists will do 10, 15 maybe. But there's a simplicity about keeping it to a few colors, and then there's kind of a painterliness that you can get by mixing the colors together on one layer. So that's a little bit about the process to get there. And of course, there's always the challenge when you're doing multiple colors here of registration, meaning that you're actually getting the red and the yellow in the right place, and it's not covering something that it's not supposed to. And I tend to be very detailed as an artist in my drawing, so making sure that red didn't overlap my the barbed wire that was supposed to pop out with white, the white paper. Those things are kind of tough. So when doing a lot of these, you gotta like really make sure your registration is right, and
the barbed wire in particular is very impressive. Yeah.
Thank you. I think I've been asked before, what do I prefer? And I don't know. I like both. The process of being in the studio and printing out 100 of these, and then actually by 50, I'm kind of done. But also, that initial phase of just making that initial drawing, thinking through what's going to be on there, and then coming back and saying, hey, there it is, it's done. I can share it with folks.
Yeah, and just for reference, I believe there were 100 portfolios made. I think that was the edition. Yeah, I hope we answered the question about your artistic process. How long have you been making prints?
Probably about 10 years or so.
Okay.
I really, it was about 10 years ago that I really started doing screen prints pretty seriously when I joined Just Seed. Before that, I had been mostly doing etching and linoleum cuts. So, and I'm still, I still do those as well.
Sure.
And increasingly, I've just been doing digital prints. As in the last year, my go-to place to print has been closed due to the pandemic.
Oh yeah.
I've set up and done some short runs in my house, but that's a little. I don't have my own studio, so that gets a little messy. Hanging a bunch of wet prints, setting up lines in the house and doing that. But I have had some projects that needed to be done, and we've done those as digital prints.
Wow. Yeah, another of the challenges of the past year plus. Well, one more question that's come in, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So this person asks, you've been talking about posters as pedagogical tools. There's also a long tradition of posters, especially broadsheets, as political tools. So do you think this poster is in conversation with the tradition of political broadsheets? And are there broadsheets that have influenced your own work?
Absolutely. That is a great question. So when I do, when I speak to students, I usually start with a set of slides about things that have influenced my work. And I learned a lot of this. I was not trained as an artist. I studied architecture in school, and now I work in housing policy. But in my organizing work in San Francisco, I was part of a group called the Mission Anti-Displacement Coalition. And through that, that group had a relationship with a group of young artists who, had learned through the same teachers, Juan Fuentes and Felixito Robles at the Cultural Center, called the San Francisco Print Collective. And they ran grassroots classes for anybody to learn how to make their own posters, to learn the kind of really simple, starting tools to go out and wheat paste around the city. And in that particular period, it was kind of a first wave of very intense gentrification in the late 90s, early 2000s. It wasn't broadsheets as much as wheat pasting posters that reflected on those struggles. But what was, I think, to me, the kind of learning moment from working with the print collective is that the work was always in relationship to the organizing. So I joined the print collective, and you know, it was, as artists, we had our own kind of autonomy in terms of here's our vision, but there was always a relationship, and how do you respect organizers and people on the ground and how they want to see themselves represented. So through the print collective, I learned about Posada and the Mexican the Mexican broadsheet movement that Posada was very much a part of, the Taller de Gráfica Popular, a lot of things that came out of the 1910 revolution and the kind of years after that. And then on through, you know, other printmakers who were in that similar kind of relationships with movements. So whether it was out of Cuba, the Ospal, and the posters that came out of a magazine called the Continental that tried to draw the parallels of national liberation struggles across Latin America and Asia and Africa. And then here, where, you know, some of my teachers sort of grew up out of the Chicano poster movement. And again, not quite broadsheets, but this sense that there is something that is educating the broad public about the organizing that's happening. And then back to broadsheets, a friend of mine did a little show some years ago that was basically a Posada broadsheet, and then each of us would fill our own inside for what you put the images and the sayings, and that was a lot of fun.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that sounds great.
And it was a way, you know, I think one of the challenges of political poster making is that there's a lot of negative that we see around us. There's a lot of oppression, and some of the most powerful posters are the ones that really kind of show that the horror of, say, the Vietnam War. You all might be familiar with, you know, the one that says "and babies," showing some of the killing fields in Vietnam. But there's also sort of the aspect of, and those you might see on the street, or you might, you know, today then see in galleries as a reflection of that particular moment, but you might not want to hang that in your house. You might not want to have that kind. And so one of the challenges is, how do you bring beauty or humor? And I think Posada was brilliant at kind of displaying some of the evils of his time through the humor of the skeletons, the calacas, that kind of made fun of the ruling classes or made fun of the foibles of the bourgeoisie, and yet, you know, you can enjoy it. So,
well, and that's a wonderful ending point, because I think your print helps us see that beauty as well in some of the challenges and struggles that people go through to this day and have gone through for hundreds of years. So I think we are out of time, but this has been a wonderful discussion. It's been great to hear more about this print and your work, Fernando. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Will.
Of course. And one more time, I'll mention to people that you can see Fernando's work in the exhibition Viva la Libertad, Latin America and the Age of Revolutions at the Newberry Library in Chicago until July 24th. And thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time.